Matriarch Elizabeth was not looking forward to the upcoming report she would have to give for the council capital. She had been poring over the report she had regarding the war to make sense of everything going on, and none of it was good. They weren't losing, but their cost of victory was incredibly high. The war on Bastion had become a war of attrition, and she felt the humans were winning. Even if the hunter-killers took ground, it seemed to be measured in such small increments that the pile of bodies it took hardly seemed worth it. If it wasn't such a political matter, she'd have argued for retreating from the planet. The cost of life was far too high for a single colony, even if it was the only one the Libratonians had. However, this wasn't about the Libratonians anymore. Their numbers had always been small, and their fleets crippled since the treaty after the end of the war. This was about the humans who had for some reason dedicated themselves to the Libratonian cause. Elizabeth still wasn't sure how it had all happened, but she knew they'd been very lazy in analysing the species. No one had suspected their ground combat forces to be so incredibly tough. They lacked exoskeletons, and possessed no natural blades, pincers or talons, but their strength was unheard of, and so was their tenacity and will to fight. But more than that, they were far more cunning than they appeared. She found the contracts the humans had made to build the FTL gates and convoys, and then maintain them. Not only had their rates been incredibly low, but the speed at which they built them was unheard of. Most had simply figured that their strange ability to face the void of space without being terrified meant they were willing to take the jobs no one else wanted to make their place in the galaxy. But now they knew the truth of the matter. All their communications leading into the war were compromised. The FTL networks near human territory were out of council control. The Crusticans had long been known as the most cunning and devious species there was, and they'd been entirely outplayed at every step by these barbaric humans. For a species that had never engaged in an intergalactic war before, they seemed to know just how to wage one. Council scientists had long abandoned research on alternative FTL methods, since the gates allowed them to control other populations and the lanes of traffic. But the humans had developed that damn hop drive before they even knew there was a greater galaxy. The technology behind the FTL gates was less complicated, but no human scientist had realized it somehow. Now this twist of fate, which had made one species look at space travel differently, gave them an unprecedented edge in the war. The only positive thing the matriarch could attribute to the humans was their taste. The prisoners she had been consuming on her private hunting grounds were quite tasty indeed. All except the ones from the subcontinent known as India. She was told it was something about their diet, of mostly chemical weapons, but after that first horrible night of wrenched gut pain, she vowed never to eat another one of that kind again. This sentiment was shared by the few other matriarchs who had the opportunity to sample human flesh. The tests they had been running on the civilians they had captured to start the war didn't give them much hope of finding some sort of miracle weapon to use against them either. They ate chemical weapons. Their alcohol was significantly more concentrated than most species could survive, and their species had taken too long to develop reliable cleaning methods. Their bodies could handle all manner of germs and viruses. They'd evolved in such a hell of an environment. They were natural fighters, but you wouldn't think it from looking at them. As she determined with hunting the civilians, their first instinct was to try and turn something into a weapon since they didn't have any of their own. They were a very tool-oriented species, which she figured made sense due to their physical traits. She'd learned the hard way that they could also throw things rather well, without any computer assistance. After getting pelted by rocks the first few times, she had all small stones removed from her hunting grounds. She was covered in a very tough exoskeleton, and had incredibly sharp forelegs and claws, so they didn't really stand a chance. But that didn't mean she wanted them to keep blacking out a handful of her 12 eyes during every hunt. Slowly, She shook her head as she went back to reading the reports coming in from her various cells across the galaxy. She'd stopped butchering juveniles in anger, as she'd quickly run out of them if she kept at it like she had when the war had first begun. Their incompetence only reminded her why matriarchs existed in the first place. Another 10,000 dead on Bastion. The Greslin fleets were back in control of the FTL lanes around the system, but they couldn't stop the humans from jumping into the system itself, and then back out into dead space. Only one shipyard capable of building dreadnoughts remained functional. But with the crushing defeat they had faced, thanks to that human weapon that launched projectiles faster than any railgun they'd ever devised, her analysts weren't even sure dreadnoughts were viable ship classes. How could these humans change warfare so drastically for the rest of the galaxy? Everyone fought in similar manners before now. What gave them the right to be so different? She'd heard they even had a saying for this sort of thing. All is fair in war and bouncy bouncy. She didn't know what that second part meant, but assumed it was another of their strange and barbaric sports. She'd never seen a species that needed tools to survive nature to be so absurdly focused on physical contests. They defied every classification they had originally assumed them to fit in. The border conflicts they had had with their inclusion to the greater galaxy had been only naval battles because other species wanted the resources in their colonized systems, but not the colonies themselves. These Americans had a habit of making death worlds into homes for some reason. Most species who came from a death world were thrilled to settle on nicer planets. They didn't get homesick. The only saving grace her species, and most of the other council members had, was higher birth rates. Matriarchs weren't fond of breeding, and peacetime birth rates reflected this. But when it came time to start churning out future hunter-killers, they could kick up production. But that meant giving up her position and power to become another breeder. She hated that thought. She needed something to keep her from being punished for failure, to identify the threat humans possessed before the war began. Never mind the fact that she had been assigned to watch the Libertonians, and not humans. Somehow all of this had become her fault. That made her blink all of her eyes for a moment. Of course, she began to sift through the various reports that had been given to her. The human, and that damned bird. They hadn't been seen since the museum. They still had no idea how they'd escaped, but she knew they'd been heading to the capital before war broke out. It was possible they were still heading that way, even if there was no evidence to support it. They'd be insane to show up on the Council's capital world with this war going in full force, but if she'd learned anything about these humans, it was that they were insane. Yes. She quickly began to type up a report. New information has come to light that a grave threat... No, a grave and credible threat has been discovered. There is a very real chance the Libertonian and human sought for the grievous terrorist attack on the Pluvian Museum of Fine Arts will attempt to attack the coming General Council Assembly. This dire threat requires immediate doubling of security. No, wait, anyone could do that. This dire threat requires a very delicate touch. A simple increase of security will be noticed, and their attack can be adjusted. Only a matriarch with the most intricate knowledge of humans will be qualified to monitor security for the summit. Who will be reading this report? She thought it over for a moment, and then added, Time is of the essence. As I am the most qualified matriarch, I shall leave for the summit immediately. The safety of our grand matriarch is too important to wait. Cackling at her genius, she quickly sent off the report to the various matriarchs she'd have to inform. No one was in a position to stop her from taking this assignment, which would clearly keep her in a position of power. If she was right, and they actually showed up, then she'd be rewarded, and they'd forget about blaming her for something that wasn't even her fault. Finally, she clicked her personal comm on. We're leaving for the capital immediately. bring along my usual supplies and a dozen human prisoners. I'm sure our Grand Matriarch will be interested in tasking our foe." "Yes, Matriarch. May I ask what we're doing at the capital?" "We're hunting." She looked over at the face currently displayed on her terminal. "I'm coming for you, human. And if you're insane enough to show up to the summit, mark my words, I will feast upon the flesh of Billy Bob, Space Trucker." Emily and Amelia were looking into the shimmering blue light of the pocket dimension when they saw the light seem to change. Emily quickly pulled Amelia back as Billy Bob came flying out of it, along with a large black metal case that clanged against the cargo bay floor. The human was clutching a large American flag to his chest as he sat up and held it in the air. "Why'd you guys have this?" "That was given to us by your CIA agents last we met with them. That and the case you found it draped over. We could have brought that out of the pocket dimension on our own, you know. There wasn't really a need to go diving in there," Jonas was mentioning, in the calm manner he'd displayed this entire time. "I didn't dive in there to find this. I had no idea you had it. I dove in there to get those two to stop fighting." He looked up at Emily and Amelia. "It would have been over quick," Emily said, with a glare at Amelia. "Quick with your defeat." The wings went up. "Hey, stop that!" Billy Bob stood up and waved the flag between them. Their wings went down and they backed up. "What's with you two? Is this some sort of family feud thing? Hatfields and McCoys? The Lannisters and Starks? The Skywalkers and Fetts? Wait, maybe not that last one, but still, you guys need to leave this sort of bad blood behind." "What? This has nothing to do with our families," Amelia said with a huff. "Well, it does, but not like that," Emily said, as Amelia tilted her head side to side as if changing her mind to agree. "What do you mean?" "Our families are very good friends. Our parents are all well known and respected. It's just, we've known each other forever, and it has never been decided which one of us is truly better," Emily said, with a glare at Amelia as if daring her to disagree. But the other Libertonian sighed and nodded. "As superior as I obviously am, the only one who's ever felt that way is myself, and the same goes for her." Emily nodded. "What? Not even your parents agree with either one of you?" "No!" they both said at the same moment, and then glared at each other, crossing their arms as they mirrored one another. Amelia spoke up first afterwards, however. "Every time one of us tried to get them to pick, they just start discussing the merits and advantages we both have. It's so aggravating," Emily said, sounding like a teen for a moment. But then she looked at Billy Bob with a new eye. "Bad? You're able to say which one of us is better." "Hey, that's not fair, we just met," Amelia protested. But Billy Bob was already waving his hands, and, incidentally, the flag he still held. No, absolutely not. I'm not getting involved here. This doesn't end well for me no matter how you look at it. I'm not picking sides here." They both ground out at that, feathers and wings rusting for a moment. "Hey, we have work to do, you know. You two can settle this later." "That's what everyone always says," Amelia huffed out. "I want to settle this once and for all." "Tell me about it," Emily agreed with a nod. "Well, if you've waited this long, you can wait a little longer," Billy Bob said, as he looked between the two of them. Then he looked down at the flag in his hands. Looking around for a moment, he didn't see any place to really put it, so he shrugged and wrapped it around his shoulders, tying the ends together in a loose knot to form a shawl of sorts. The Libertonian stared at him when he was done. "Hey, this is the first real American flag I've had in a while. I'm not letting go of it that easy." He turned then, proudly walking away, the flag shawl fluttering a little around his shoulders. Soon, he had found the conference room on the Rosie, and were sitting down as the Libertonians prepared to explain how their infiltration of the council meeting would work. Emily sat to his right and Amelia to his left, glaring at each other while he sat between them to keep the fighting to a minimum, even if the snarky comments were at maximum. Soon, the one known as Jonas was up at front when a projection took up the screen next to him. So, as we all know, this operation is vital to the downfall of the Council and their corruption of non-founder species, not to mention Victor in the ongoing war. After all, our fight with them goes back centuries. Ever since the first shadows of doubt cast in those early meetings of the Council that we helped found, we saw the darkness that could beset the minds of those we had hoped to use to usher in a golden age of peace and prosperity for the entire galaxy. Jesus Christ, Jonas, I don't need the Encyclopedia Galactica entry on this, just give me the wiki version. The others looked at him as he sighed. Keep it short, I don't need the background. I just need to know what our actual plan is for getting into their meeting. I don't even need to know what's going on after that, because all I'm gonna do is fuck shit up. Jonas glanced around the room for a moment, and then quietly clicked a button on a device he had, advancing the slides behind, along quite a ways. Jesus, did you really fill this whole thing with history? I wasn't sure how much you knew and wanted to give this operation context. I appreciate that, Jonas, but I don't need it, Billy Bob said, and then noticed Emily making faces at Amelia. When he looked at her, she stopped and looked away. But when he looked back at Amelia, she was quickly looking away, which made him suspect she'd be doing the same thing while he was looking the other way. He shook his head, then, wondering just what it was that made these two so competitive. Although he got that shift-eyed guy look as he glanced between them. Then he quickly remembered all their razor-sharp talons and quickly got the look of a guy who decided on living over getting some extra fun. Right, well, this is a general layout of the city. A map soon took up the slide. The core dome? Dome? Oh, I thought you said you had context. On the history. This is why I wanted to go through my presentation. I'm not sure what you do and don't know. How long is it? 2 hours, roughly. 2 hours? No, just explain the domes. Well, this is a superplanet. I think your species would call it a Gaia. It would actually be perfect for humans, really. It's roughly your same gravity. But for the rest of us, it's much too heavy. However, the planet has a large number of craters on the surface. These natural shelters were filled with domes and gravity controls, to let various species live in them more easily. See, that wasn't so hard. Now, please continue. Where was I? The core dome on the map here has the council building at the centre for obvious reasons. Each of the founders have a small district around it, with direct access and then a public corridor here. Since we have help from the space hamsters, we'll be entering through this district here. Now, what we're planning on is to let the summit begin. Then we'll enter this entrance here. He tapped on the map. The power suit you stole from the museum is going to be in this loading bay here. Another slide came up, with a map of the building itself. He tapped on the map to indicate the loading bay. As a fake statue, Amelia will be piloting it. Billy Bob looked to the Libertonian next to him, who nodded. When we send the signal, she's going to join you, Billy Bob, in assaulting the main chamber. The rest of us will have our own objectives in the city, ensuring that the broadcast continues no matter what. Billy Bob nodded at that. Speaking of, is there any way to get control of the internal broadcasting system? What for? So I can blast awesome music as we storm the summit. Don't you guys know how effective battle music is? It gets your blood flowing and helps terrorize the enemy. Jonas glanced at Emily, who shrugged. He used it against the Borgs. I'm not sure it was as effective as he says, or if it was just the fact they had no idea how to fight against ballistic weapons. Billy Bob shrugged. I think Freddie Mercury helped me win that battle. They say his spirit will assist those in need, especially if you are a poor boy who needs no sympathy. Easy come, easy go, little high, little low. He was about to go on when Emily just set one of her hands on top of his. Sorry. I don't think it would be wise to take over the internal PA until we're already in the main chamber. And then we need to give control to Emily so she can present the device. You know, the whole reason that the other species might drop out of the council and, if not join our side, then at least stop assisting the ass crabs. Billy Bob always smiled when his translator filled that in. He couldn't even remember the actual name for the damn things. But he did stare at Jonas for a moment. Wait, is that all there is to it? You had 2 hours of slides and all you had to tell me was this little bit? I feel like context is important. It helps give you a sense of why you're fighting and how important it is. Jonas, is important because this is the fucking capital. There's no going back. We win or we die. Or maybe we even win and die, so I kinda understand why it's so important. The large Libertonian shrugged his shoulders and wings at the same time as Billy Bob just shook his head. Alright, so the hamsters get us down to the planet. And just right up into the capital? We only have to worry about what happens after the summit has begun? Jonas nodded at that as Billy Bob rubbed his chin. How's that work? Are the hamsters really that good at tricking the others? Billy Bob looked around as every Libertonian in the room laughed at his suggestion. Even Emily and Amelia stopped glaring at one another to laugh. Soon, the laughter died down as Jonas shook his head. No, not even a little. That's why no one will suspect it. They don't bother checking ships crewed by hamsters anymore. They always give themselves up. But we're landing soon. How do we stop them from messing up on our approach to the planet? He asked as he looked around. Emily shook her head. Don't worry. I gave them a script. Up in the bridge, the hamsters were looking at the script as they listened to ground control. Are you transporting any illicit materials? One of them moved his finger along the line. No. Then he smiled at the others, who nodded and gave him a thumbs up, like Mr. Billy Bob had taught them. Are you transporting any known fugitives or terrorists? Once more, the hamster moved his finger along the page. No. More nods and thumbs up. Hey, this is easy. On the ground, the controller rolled his eyes and wondered just how it was possible the Gerweldians hadn't all killed themselves. He sounded impressed at his ability to answer simple questions. Are you carrying any explosives? The ground controller waited for the inevitable. No. Before quickly replying, you're all clear to land at these coordinates. The Peruvian shook his head and moved on to the next ship. As if a cargo vessel crewed by Gerweldians could possibly pose a threat to the Council. Back in the conference room, Jonas looked like he wished he had more slides, but there really wasn't anything else to go over, it seemed. Up until Billy Bob looked around for a moment. Wait, what about weapons? What about them? Emilia asked. Am I just using what I've got on my Longhorn? I think I'm out of ammo for the MP-44 and the Luger only has a few shots. I've got plenty of shotgun shells and 45s for my handguns, but I feel like I'm going to need something more substantial. Oh, right, I forgot to mention. Your CIA left you some in that crate you brought with you out of the other dimension. You were focused on the flag, so I forgot. The CIA left me a goodie basket? Billy Bob said with a big grin. He quickly stood up and walked back out to the cargo bay. Thoughts running wild in his head at what would wait for him. The Libertonians quickly moved to follow, since they needed to get ready for the mission anyway. When he reached the box, he tapped on the button to open it, but was greeted with a red light and a beep. Hey, what gives? You have to put the code in on the side, Jonas said. Billy Bob looked to the side of the box and noticed where he could tap in a code. He frowned for a moment, looking at the 8 blank spaces. "What's the code?" "They didn't say. They just said any American would know it." Billy Bob stared at it for a moment. 8 numbers. He thought it over for a moment and then grinned wide as he typed it in. 07, 04, 1776. The box played an 8-bit version of the Stars and Stripes Forever and opened. Billy Bob's eyes began to gleam, and his smile grew very wide, very quickly, as he looked at what was inside. And so ends another chapter in the adventures of Billy Bob, Space Trucker.